Hi everyone, we're back again for our next chapter in the Ancient Greek unit. We are reading our purple textbook, History Alive, the Ancient World. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 29. This is on the Golden Age of Athens, so just to kind of remind us of where we were at, the Greeks have just won the Persian Wars. However, the Persian soldiers had burned Athens completely to the ground. So what we know as Athens in their Golden Age, it happens after the Persian Wars. So your mini project for this chapter is going to be to create a keepsake. Something that if you would go to a place, you would take this thing home with you and maybe put it in a memory box or a scrapbook or keep it for later. So as we're visiting the different places of Athens, I want you to be thinking of which areas you are really attracted to and what type of keepsake you might want to make. Don't worry, we'll give a lot more information on how to create a keepsake, what makes something a keepsake, and we'll worry about that a little bit later. But for today, we're going to start reading chapter 29, the Golden Age of Athens. All right, chapter 29, section 1, Introduction. In chapter 28, you read about how Athens and Sparta came together to defeat the Persian Empire. At the end of the Persian Wars, Athens was in ruins. The Athenians were inspired to rebuild by a great leader named Pericles. Under his leadership, Athens entered a golden age, a period of great peace and wealth. Remember, that doesn't mean that everything's covered in gold, but typically if someone's in a golden age, there's a lot of wealth and time for them to flourish things like arts and literature. So under his leadership, Athens entered a golden age, a period of great peace and wealth. Between 479 and 431 BCE, Athens was the artistic and cultural center of Greece. Imagine that you could visit Athens during its golden age. Passing through the city's gates, you wind your way through the narrow streets to the Agora, the public meeting place in the center of the city. The Agora is a great square. On two sides, there are large, stately public buildings. The other two sides have covered walkways where people meet and talk with friends. In the center are market stalls with things to buy from all over Greece and beyond. A high, craggy hill known as the Acropolis rises above the city, crowned with great temples. In this chapter, you will explore several sites in ancient Athens. At each stop, you'll learn more about Greek culture. You'll find out about Greek religion, architecture, sculpture, drama, philosophy, and sports. Chapter 29, Section 2, A City of Contrasts. Ancient Athens was a city of great contrasts, or differences. People lived in small, uncomfortable houses that lined narrow streets, yet the city's public spaces and buildings were large and stately. So where you lived, not so impressive, but the city-state buildings, the government buildings, those in temples, those were very impressive. Most homes in Athens were 1 story high and made of mud bricks. The homes of poor families were very simple. Wealthier people had larger houses with rooms built around a central courtyard, but even the homes of the rich were plain and often uncomfortable. Athenian houses had few windows, and they were lit by oil lamps. They were smoky and cold in the winter, and smoky and hot in the summer. The streets between the houses were narrow, crooked, and dirty. People threw their garbage into the streets, so neighborhoods often smelled bad. It was the public spaces and buildings that were the pride of Athens. The Athenians built large government buildings around the Agora, that's the marketplace. These buildings were made of stone. On the Acropolis, remember that's a hill above the city, the Athenians built magnificent temples as earthly homes for their gods and goddesses. So when we think of temples, we know that they're religious or spiritual buildings, but all different cultures have a different use for them. In ancient Greece, their temples were built as a home for their gods and goddesses. The most famous temple standing on the Acropolis was the Parthenon. It was built to honor the goddess Athena. As you remember from the last chapter, Athens was burned to the ground during the Persian Wars. According to legend, when the Athenians returned to their city, even the sacred olive tree, a gift from Athena, had been burned and seemed to be dead. Then someone noticed a tiny leaf growing from the burnt trunk. The Athenians took this as a sign that Athena had not abandoned the city, and they decided to rebuild it. Kind of has a little bit of a Wall-E feel there, doesn't it? I think so. Next, chapter 29, section 3, Religion, the Temple at Delphi. The temples of Athens show how important religion was to the Greeks. The Greeks worshipped many gods and goddesses who they believed looked and often acted like humans, but did not grow old or die. Each god or goddess had a power over a particular area of life. It's very common in the ancient world, isn't it? Sometimes the Greeks asked them for advice. For example, a famous temple in the town of Delphi was dedicated to the god Apollo. People could ask Apollo questions through a priestess who was called the Oracle of Delphi. To answer the question, the priestess went into a trance. The words she spoke were thought to come from Apollo himself. Kind of like the whole oracle bone thing in China, but a little bit different. The Greeks told colorful stories about the gods called myths. According to these stories, the home of the gods was Mount Olympus, a real mountain in Greece. 12 of the gods and goddesses were particularly important. They are often called the Olympian gods. The Olympian gods were part of everyday life of ancient Greeks. People asked the gods for help when setting out on journeys by land or by sea. They dedicated festivals and sporting events to them. They decorated their temples with images of the gods. Later, we'll talk about the legacy of Greece, so some of those things that we still have today because of the ancient Greeks. Spoiler alert, one of those things is going to be architecture. When we look at many of our public buildings, they really are influenced by the ancient Greeks. So our next section is chapter 29, section 4, architecture, focusing on the Acropolis. Temples are good examples of the Greeks' talent for architecture. The Greeks built their temples as beautiful dwelling places for the gods and goddesses, rather than a place to worship. Religious ceremonies were conducted outside. The temples show the importance of balance and order in the Greeks' idea of beauty. Temples were built with rows of tall columns. The Greeks used 3 kinds of columns. The Doric column was the simplest. It had no base and got slimmer toward the top. The Ionic column was thinner. It sat on a base and had spirals carved up to the top. The Corinthian column was the most complex, with carvings that looked like leaves at the top. Don't worry, I'll include some images of these. Athenians built temples on the Acropolis to honor Athena. One of these was the Parthenon. One of the most beautiful temples in Greece, the Parthenon was built on a long rectangular platform. There were 8 columns across the front and the back, and 17 on each side. The roof slanted, creating triangles called pediments at the front and the back of the building. At the top of the temple was a band of sculptures called a frieze. The sculptures themselves are called metopes. Greek temples were many different sizes, but their basic shape was similar. Most had a main room with a statue of the temple's god or goddess. The Parthenon had a magnificent statue of Athena that stood 30 feet high. Made of wood, the statue was covered with ivory to look like flesh. Then it was dressed in clothes and decorated with gold. Like the temple itself, the statue expressed both the Greeks' love of beauty and their awe of the gods. Sadly, the Temple of Athena has not stood the test of time and barely has the Parthenon. Again, more pictures will be included. Sculpture, a marble workshop. The statue of Athena in the Parthenon was a wonderful example of another important Greek art, sculpture. Sculptors in Athens often set up a workshop near the site where the finished statue would go. Sculptor apprentices, those are sculptors in training, first made a life-size clay model supported by wooden or metal frames. The general outline of the statue was then roughed out in marble. A master sculptor added details and finishing touches. Greek statues were colorful. Metal workers attached any bronze pieces that went with the statue, like spears and shields. Painters applied wax and bright colors to the statue's hair, lips, clothes, and headdress. Creating lifelike statues was one of the great achievements of Greek sculptors. The earliest Greek statues have been influenced by Egyptian styles. Like the Egyptians, the Greeks created larger-than-life figures that faced front, with their arms held stiffly at their sides. Later Greek sculptors created much more realistic statues in natural poses with more detailed muscles, hair, and clothing. One of the most famous sculptors in Athens was a man named Phidias. He designed the figures that line the top of the Parthenon. He also sculpted the statue of Athena that stood inside the temple. The statue carried a shield of gold with carvings of two faces, those of the great Athenian leader Pericles and Phidias himself. Some people thought Phidias had gone too far by carving his own likeness on Athena's shield. Still, the Greeks greatly admired his marvelous statues. They said that Phidias was one person who had seen the true image of the gods and revealed it to humans. Next, we're going to look at chapter 29, section 6, Drama, the Theater of Dionysus. In addition to architecture and sculpture, the ancient Greeks excelled in drama, the art of theater. Going to the theater was a regular part of Athenian life. The theater of Dionysus in the city could hold thousands of people. Dionysus was the god of theater and wine. Greek plays grew out of the songs and dances that the Greeks performed at harvest time to honor him. As Greek playwrights developed their art, they began to write plays that told stories. The plays included a few main characters and a chorus. The chorus was a group of men who recited lines that commented on the actions of the characters. The words spoken by the chorus helped to explain and expand on the story. So not really like a chorus in a song, almost more like a group narrator type of experience. There were no women actors in ancient Greece. Men played all the characters, both male and female. That was one reason actors wore masks. The mask also showed the audience whether a character was happy or sad. And yes, I hope you're starting to get that image in your mind of the two drama masks, hopefully. Plays were staged in open-air theaters. The Greeks would build a theater into the side of a hill. The theater was shaped like a bowl so that everyone could hear what was said. No microphones. The seats rose in a semicircle around the stage at the bottom of the bowl. Scenery was painted on canvas and hung behind the actors. Plays were often a part of competitions that could last for days. Judges who chose winners in 4 categories: tragic playwrights, comic playwrights, leading tragic actor, and leading comic actor. The winning writers and actors were crowned with olive leaves and given prizes such as figs, which is a type of fruit, and wine. Chapter 29, Section 7, Philosophy, the Agora. Like other Greeks, Athenians loved to talk and argue. In sheltered spaces on the side of the Agora, men gathered to discuss the world around them. They talked about nature, trading ideas about what the natural world was made of and how it worked. They also talked about things they couldn't see, such as the meaning of life, justice, truth, and beauty. They called this kind of thinking philosophy, which means the love of wisdom. And wisdom is essentially knowledge, understanding. One of the greatest philosophers in Athens was a man named Socrates. Socrates was always encouraging people to question things they thought they knew. He taught others by asking them questions that forced them to think about their beliefs. He asked such questions as, what is the good life for a man? What is truth? How do you know? Even in Athens, where people loved new ideas, this constant questioning got Socrates into trouble. His enemies accused him of not honoring the gods and of leading young people into error and disloyalty. In 399 BCE, Socrates was brought to trial. In defending himself, Socrates said he was the wisest man in Greece because he knew that he did not know anything. The jury found Socrates guilty and sentenced him to death. Friends encouraged him to escape from Athens, but Socrates said he would honor the law. He died by drinking hemlock, the juice of a poisonous plant. The example of Socrates inspired many other Greek thinkers, especially his student Plato. In turn, Plato taught another great philosopher, Aristotle. You will meet Aristotle in the next chapter. All right, last section for the Golden Age of Athens, 29.8, Sports, the Panathenaic Games. The Greeks' interest in philosophy shows how much they valued the mind. Their love of sports shows that they also prized a healthy body. The Greeks often held athletic events to honor gods and goddesses. In Athens, games were held as a part of the Pantheia, a festival that honored the goddess Athena. The high point of the festival was the procession or solemn parade. The Athenians attached a new robe for the statue of Athena to the mast of a ship and pulled it through the city to the temple. The Pantheistic Games included many events. There were horse and chariot races, including one event in which men jumped off a moving chariot. Men also competed in foot races. In one race, men ran in their armor. The race was fun to watch because the heavy armor led the men to swerve and crash into each other. The games also included combat sports like boxing and wrestling. In an event called the Pancratium, men were allowed to punch, kick, and even choke each other. The event ended when one fighter surrendered, lost consciousness, or died. The winning athletes in these games were crowned with wreaths of laurel leaves and given pots filled with olive oil. Another set of games was played every 4 years at Olympia, that's a different city-state, to honor the god Zeus. Called the Olympics, these games were so important that the Greeks would call a truce from all wars so that athletes could travel safely to the games. All right, so just like I said at the start, there will be a keepsake project that we'll talk about that's going to go with the Golden Age of Athens. This is probably one of our more student choice flexible projects. So look forward to hearing more and sharing more information on that soon. Thanks everyone for listening to the Golden Age of Athens.